Okay, so for today's class, I just want to talk about, even though I know that there are no writing assignments due for this week, but let's just talk a little bit about the Graph article, which is about hidden intellectualism. And this is a really, really fascinating article, I think, or essay, I think, because I can imagine that a lot of you just in your high school days can remember people that were really, really intelligent, maybe had street smarts, but not necessarily book smarts. In other words, they didn't really do well in school, but you could tell that they were really, really intelligent in other ways. Just out of curiosity, just in the chat box or hit the talk button, can anybody think of people that you knew in high school or wherever who were really, really intelligent in some areas, but just not really academic smart? Any examples that you can think of? Yeah, so Shaylin says yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Jose says, yeah, I mean, we could all think of these people. And what Graf says is that it's a mistake for people in our society to just conclude that, oh, well, somebody didn't do well in high school or they didn't graduate from college and they're not really intelligent. Actually, they're very intelligent, maybe in different ways. And what Graf says is that, his own personal interest started out with sports and with baseball. And even though he was maybe not necessarily that well, he didn't do that well in school, just the fact that he knew so much about baseball, that began his interest. And you can imagine too, it's in, as the last bullet point says here, intellectualism by other means. And you can see here how just an interest in baseball just might actually turn out to be something deeper as he goes on in his career. Like, for example, if you start out with your interest in baseball, well, then how about your interest in performance enhancing drugs? And what does that mean for the sport? And what does that mean for society? And how can that kind of, and also, I mean, just think of also with sports in college. Well, if you start out with your interest in college football, for instance, well, what does that say, or what can you develop about women in sports, in college sports, and so forth? So in other words, your initial interest can actually spark different intellectual academic conversations later on. And I think that's kind of what Graf is hinting at with this article, with this essay, is that we do have hidden intellectualism sometimes, where we start out with something and then we can kind of expand it into deeper subjects. And then also keep in mind too, with this essay, with Graf's essay about hidden intellectualism, the same thing is true with choosing a major. You might not be good at all in one subject, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be bad in a different subject. In fact, part of choosing a major in college is that you're going to be a specialist in your major. You're going to be a specialist in the career that you choose. So it might not be the case where you do well in all these other classes, but hey, you can excel in one area. And it's a little bit different than high school where, in high school, they have to have standardized tests and everything's got to be across the board. And you might have to, pass the ACT and the SAT. Well, that's all good and fine. But when you get to college, you're going to hone in your career. After you get through all these, basic classes that you have to take, you're going to specialize in a certain field. And that's where your hidden intellectualism, what Graf is talking about here, that's when your hidden intellectualism is going to really shine through, if it hasn't already. I mean, I assume that you're going to be doing fine in all these other classes as well, but your hidden intellectualism is going to be your major, what you specialize in. So I know this is only freshman English, so I'll be long gone by the time you get to your your major and everything. But that's something to keep in mind, is that your hidden intellectualism is going to be your specialty that you're going to have and you're going to develop throughout your college career. Okay. Also, the concept of argumentation doesn't always have to be about academics, and that's what Graf is kind of talking about. You know, it's one thing to, like, for example, if I were to give you guys an assignment about Gloria Steinem, the great feminist, who actually I saw her speak in my college, but I mean, great feminist, and we'll talk maybe more about her in a future class. But I mean, if I were to give you an assignment about her, it would kind of be like, you wouldn't even know what to think of her at first, right? But if I were to give you an assignment about Lady Gaga, and then you can eventually develop opinions about Gloria Steinem, that would be different, because it's talking to students about things that are relevant to them today. It doesn't always have to be about Shakespeare and about Jane Austen and all these other famous authors yet. We can talk to students about the things that are really important to them that are happening today, you know, right now. So these are kind of like, the second bullet point here says gateway arguments. So we can talk about Lady Gaga or Cardi B or whoever it might be, and that can kind of foster future arguments about feminism and so forth. So these are kind of gateway arguments, and that's what I think Graf is saying. And so what he's also saying too, the third bullet point here, the last bullet point, is about the process of education is just as important as the tangible knowledge. In other words, it's not just that you have to memorize Shakespeare or Jane Austen or Faulkner or whoever the author might be. I mean, that's good, but also the process of how you get to those arguments and how you would argue about Jane Austen or Faulkner or whoever it might be, that's just as important as the tangible knowledge, because that is what's going to carry with you throughout the rest of your career. So let me just show you a clip from Gerald Graf here, just a little video clip.
So there's three obstacles, and the remainder of my talk addresses these. Obstacle number one, Shakespeare is not Family Guy. It's one thing for students to use their homegrown argumentation skills in a schoolyard debate with their friends about the merits or demerits of Family Guy and Beyonce, or about whether the Chicago Bulls can defeat the Miami Heat in the NBA playoffs if they get Derrick Rose back, which, by the way, is becoming less and less likely, or about which platform shoes or other clothing styles are the coolest. It's one thing to enter into debates about those topics. It's quite another thing to transfer those homegrown skills of debate into a classroom debate about competing interpretations of Macbeth, or the implications of urbanization or automation, or the present state of the economy, American economy. Many of our students, after all, won't need to be persuaded to care about Beyonce or the Chicago Bulls, but it's often not at all obvious to those students how Shakespeare or the sociology of cities figure to matter in their lives. For this reason, instead of plunging students immediately into academic debates about Shakespeare or sociology, it's a good idea to have them first debate topics they care about, and then gradually, when they've had some time to get comfortable with the practices of argumentation in our classrooms, transition from those debates, stuff they care about, over to debates about stuff we care about, or our teaching. George Hillocks and his students call this tactic, they call this tactic of starting with student debates, things they care about, gateway activities, introducing students into academic practices by first modeling those practices on topics students are already interested in or already can see the point of. In devising such gateway activities, I would think it's an advantage to be teaching the social sciences, since virtually any subject your students care about can be viewed through a sociological or a historical lens. For example, take the example I've used, a debate about what they like or don't like about Family Guy can be gradually turned into a debate about how parents and children are represented in that program and in the American popular media more generally, with supplementary readings and other materials that move in that latter direction. Similarly, student debates on cars or sports teams or clothing fashions can be ratcheted up into higher level intellectual debates on the social and cultural meanings of our national enthusiasm for these things.
Okay, so you get the idea there that what Graf is saying is that we think oftentimes that school and academics is just about the higher order, the Shakespeare's and so forth, but actually it kind of starts from the ground up. I mean, let's talk like, for example, in this class for the paper, let's talk about the things that are important to you and so forth. So we don't just have to go through the, Shakespeare and Jane Austen and things like that, although those are very, very, very good that you'll get to eventually. But what Graf says is that the first bullet point here is that there's more intellectual thirst than traditional academics when we start from the ground up. And for Graf, sports was more universal than Shakespeare or Jane Austen. But what it did is it allowed him to converse more with people around him, right? Because even though people didn't know the latest Faulkner novel or the latest Hemingway novel, they could at least talk about the latest Willie Mays hit or the latest Ted Williams hit or the home run that he had or something like that. It allowed him to, first of all, open up the conversation and also allowed him to meet more people and surround him with other people that could talk about the same thing, right? Also, what Graf says is that sometimes these academic works compare to the modern world. I don't know if anybody is a big baseball fan here, but there's a whole thing called sabermetrics, and if you've seen the movie Moneyball with Brad Pitt, it's all about that. We think that like baseball is just a sport, but actually there is so much science that goes into it. And we think of these topics, that's just one example, but I mean, we think of these topics as being superficial and so forth, but there's a lot more academics that goes into this stuff, right? And then also remember that your textbook asks, who cares? Why? So for your second paper, of course, you want to talk about, okay, what's the big issue? You're going to be writing about, and I know that like last time I gave you guys some possible topics, but I'll include a lot more when you see the instructions. But whatever topic you choose, you do have to do a research source. You have to find a research source from the library. And I'll go over that again as we get closer to that. But the main thing to focus on, though, in at least the last half of the paper, is why should we care about this? Like, why should your reader care about the topic that you're talking about? What is the main issue and why is it important? It's one thing to talk about how something might be good for a good paper, but the last part, at least last part of the paper should talk about why is it important? Why should the reader care? What is the significance? And that's what the last part of the paper should focus on. Okay. Also, just a few things here. I want to show you a couple more papers that we'll go through here. We'll wrap up here a little bit early because there's not too much I just want to cover a couple more papers here, but let's kind of go through the little Siegel book here. Make sure on page 283, it says to make sure that the pronoun reference is clear. So you can see here some examples. This one example, my grandparents like playing cards with their neighbors because they aren't very competitive. Okay, that makes sense. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that grammatically, but where do you think that they could put a comma here if you had to just play editor for a second? Where would you think that a comma could be put here? Yeah, because, exactly. Hunter, exactly. Yeah, because. Also, though, what I want to make clear, though, about this example is that you want to make sure that your references are clearly indicating who you're referring to. Because, like, look at this statement. My grandparents like playing cards with their neighbors because they aren't very competitive. Well, who are they? I mean, who is they? Is it the grandparents or is it the neighbors? So you just want to make sure that your references are clear as to who you're referring to. So the example would be, the edit would be, my grandparents like playing cards with their neighbors who aren't very competitive. So we're clear here as to who the grandparents, or I'm sorry, who the people that are not being competitive are here. It's the neighbors in this example, right? And then also in this second example, my grandparents who aren't very competitive like playing cards with their neighbors. So in this case, we know that it's clearly the grandparents who are not very competitive. So just make sure that you are making your references clear to your reader. And then also on page 285, they give an example. Trombones might be very loud, but it was drowned out last night by the cheering crowd. Let me kind of skip past that, but take a look at this. Paul and his brother have an arrangement about sausage pizza. Paul picks off the sausage and he eats it. But in this reference here, who is the one that eats the sausage or the pizza? It's not really clear here. So you need to specify that. You need to make sure that your pronouns are clear as to who is the one that's picking off the sausage and who's the one that's eating the pizza, etc. So the way that you could clean that up would be simply like this. Paul and his brother have an arrangement about sausage pizza. Paul picks off the sausage and his brother eats it. Or Paul and his brother have an arrangement about sausage pizza. His brother picks off the sausage and Paul eats it. So you're making clear here as to who is the one that's doing the action. Also, your textbook talks about being gender neutral. I know that this is something that just by default, we all kind of mistake, unfortunately. But whenever we're talking or whenever we're speaking, we should try to be gender neutral. So, for example, anyone who gets 3 speeding tickets in a year will lose his license. Well, we all know what that means. Even if we're talking about a woman, we all know what that means, right? But just try to be gender neutral. So say his or her license. Or the second bullet point here, drivers who get 3 speeding tickets in a year will lose their license. So that's clear, it's not male, right? And then the third bullet point, anyone who gets 3 speeding tickets in a year will lose his or her license. So just try to be gender neutral. I mean, the same thing, like literally just now, just like last night, I saw an article that the article was talking about Tulsi Gabbard, right? And they still refer to her as Congressman Gabbard, even though it's actually Congresswoman. So I know that we all kind of are guilty of this about violating gender neutral, but just try to be gender neutral when you're writing. So in other words, like a sports, instead of saying sportsman, a sports person, or, you get the idea there. So try to be gender neutral. Also, another example that they talk about on page 293, first the coach enters, then you enter, then each of the player enters. Just remember to keep the same tense. What that means is that, and let me give you a better example of that, the next slide here. Keep the same tense. So for example, the neighbor across the hall from Fudd's always sign for their package. Keep the same tense. So instead of saying, The neighbor, you would always have the signs with an S there, right? Like that. The neighbor across the hall from Fudd's always signs for their package. Okay, a couple other examples here. Bates underestimates the public when she writes disparagingly about voters' intelligence. Now, this is an example here where, actually, let me give you a better example here. When you incorporate quotations, okay, so look at this. Friedman refers to a failed McDonald's menu item as the McLean Deluxe was perhaps the food industry's single effort to the mass eating. What you would want to do here is to introduce a quotation, you want to put a comma there. Okay, I know that, by the way, I know that some people are doing this with the 3 periods. That's technically correct for MLA. You don't have to necessarily worry about that. So if you do put the 3 quotations there, if it's like in the middle of a quotation here, let me highlight this. If it's in the middle of a quotation and you put the 3 periods there, that's totally fine. You don't necessarily need to do that though for MLA. You can just do this. You can say Friedman refers to a failed McDonald's menu item, quote, the McLean Deluxe was perhaps the food industry's boldest single, so you can do it that way. But probably a better way to do that when you're introducing quotations is something like this. Referring to a failed McDonald's menu item, Friedman notes that, and then you have the quotation like that. And then of course, obviously it goes without saying though, but I mean, we would have down here, we would have the page number. So let's just say that this is 13. It would be something like that, right? Okay, and remember that commas are your friends. I know we talked about this last time, but remember that don't be afraid to use commas. The mistake that we see a lot of times is that students don't use commas enough. And you could see here, just the first bullet point here, the boxer exhausted and pounded on the left of the ring. That makes no sense, right? Or I guess it does make sense, but it's not really what the writer is talking about. Where would you put commas in this sentence, do you think? To clearly indicate to the reader what you're trying to say. Any guesses? Well, this makes more sense. The boxer, exhausted and pounded, or I'm sorry, pounded on, left the ring. Okay, this clearly indicates to the reader what you're trying to say. The boxer who was exhausted and pounded on left the ring. I mean, makes way more sense and clearly indicates to the reader as opposed to this, where you just say the boxer exhausted and pounded on the left of the ring. It makes no sense, right? How about the second bullet point here? Where would you put a comma here? Yeah, exactly, Helena, after Georgia. I mean, technically speaking, you could say like, hey, maybe Georgia Lee is the author, but no, it's Georgia, the state Georgia. In Georgia, Lee's book jumped quickly to the top of the bestseller list. And then this last bullet point here, where would you put the comma here? Exactly, Helena. Yeah, after initially, like that. I mean, technically speaking, it's not a huge deal. Microsoft Word's not going to necessarily pick up on this, and you're not going to be penalized or anything like that. But yeah, think of if you were talking out loud, you would probably have a pause here, right? Initially, the council proposed. So anytime you think that there would be a pause, if you were saying this out loud, that's when you would have a comma. Okay, also, How about here? For the first one here, for the first scoreless innings, 3 scoreless innings, Clark struggled to stay awake. Where do you think you would put a comma here? Remember, if you were talking, like where would you pause? Exactly, Jose. For the first 3 scoreless innings, pause, and then you would have a comma, like right here, as Jose said. Right here, you would have a comma. Clark struggled to stay awake. And then same thing here with the second bullet point here. In the chaotic final episode of season 2, the shocking plot twist left viewers breathless. Where do you think you could put a comma here in this sentence? Exactly, Jose. Correct again. After 2, in the final, or in the chaotic final episode of season 2, pause, comma, the shocking plot twist left viewers breathless. And then actually, you know what? This is from the last class. I didn't need to put the commas there, but you see the correction there. Bette Midler, who will perform the opening act, will do her sound check at 5:30. You would actually put the commas here. Bette Midler, pause, who will perform the opening act, pause, comma, will do her sound check at 5:30. Okay, and then just a few other things here. Just a reminder that sometimes when we talk, we incorrectly spell out words. So for example, when we say that, hey, should Joe have told them, the way that it comes across when we speak is, hey, should Joe have told them? And we all do this, we're all guilty of this, but remember that for writing purposes, you want to make sure to have it correctly. So even though we say, should Joe have told them, even though that's how we talk, the way that it's written is, should Joe have told them? So we're all guilty of this. We all kind of speak differently than we should write necessarily, but that's fine. Also, in terms of me versus I, okay, this is one of the most important things to remember from this class, okay? And we all confuse this, but it's actually very, very simple to understand. The difference between me versus I in speech. Okay, whenever you say me, you're the object. You're the one that has an action to be done to them. Okay, whenever you say I, that means you are the one doing the action. So for example, let me just pull up here okay, let's take a look at this worksheet here. So take a look here at the first one. The Queen gave her autograph to Bella and blank. Okay, because you are the one that's being done to, you're the one that's being, the action done to you, it's me, okay? My sister and I went to the park because you are the one that's doing the action. You're the one that's going to the park, okay? Number 3, between you and me, Jack won the lotto. Now, even though Jack is the person that's doing the action, he won the lotto, the reference is to you and me, so it should be me. Sally, number 4, Sally, Sue, and I went to the swimming yesterday because you are the one that's doing the action, so it should be I right here. Okay, my sister and I went fun shopping because you are the one that's doing the action. You're the verb, or you're doing the verb. Math is harder for my brother and me because math is the one that's being done to you. It's not vice versa, right? So math is harder for my brother and me. And then between you and I, though, math is too hard because you are the one that's doing the action. You're the one that's doing math. It's too hard. And Sam and I, number 8, Sam and I love flying kites because I, is the one that's doing the action here. And then my teacher gave Daisy and me a detention because you are the one that's being given the attention here. So it should be me. And then Ron and I, number 10, are going golfing. because you are the ones that are doing the golfing. So you're performing the action here. So Ron and I are going golfing. And then the surprise party was given for me because once again, you are not doing the action here. You're being, the action is done to you. You're given the party. And then the dog followed Jesse and me, number 12, home because you are the ones that are being followed by the dog. So it's me right here. So I know that we get confused with some of these two, but very simple when you think of it. It's that me is the object. It's the one that's being done to them, whereas you are the one doing the action. So very simple, but I know that we all confuse that a little bit. Before we wrap up here, we're going to get done here a little bit early because I want to go through a few papers here, but real quickly though, let's go through some vocab words. Just right off the bat, before I show you these in a sentence, does anybody know what alacrity means? You'll see this a lot in with theme park reviews or movie reviews or book reviews. Alacrity just means enthusiasm or excitement. So for example, with alacrity, he ran to the roller coaster as soon as he got to the theme park. So basically just means enthusiasm, like excitement. Okay, how about scrupulous? Anybody know what scrupulous means? Scrupulous just means kind of diligence or attention. So for example, you could say, for those of you that might be going into forensics or psychology, you could say that a forensic psychologist or forensic scientist must be scrupulous when looking at evidence, meaning very diligent, very attentive, like looking over details and so forth. How about prolific? This word gets kind of thrown around, around a lot, and for a lot of people that don't necessarily know exactly what it means, people sometimes assume prolific with like great necessarily. It doesn't always mean great. It just means a lot in number. So for example, you could say that a certain music artist has a prolific biography, meaning that they come out with tons and tons of material and albums and things like that. So for example, you could say, yeah, exactly, Valerie, that it's a lot of something. So for example, you could say that the musician produced nearly an album per year because the musician produced an album per year. The critics considered her to be very prolific, meaning that great in number, exactly as Valerie said. Also, exasperate, okay? I'm sure that you guys have heard of this, but I mean, exasperate just means to make worse. So for example, if you, I don't know, if you have an illness and you're taking a medicine that's not good, that will exasperate the situation, right? Or for example, delaying the proceedings will only exasperate the situation, means make worse, essentially. And then finally, hackneyed, or I mean, some people pronounce it hackneyed, but that just means kind of boring or tiresome. So what you could do is take a look at modern movies these days and say that, hey, a lot of these plots are very hackneyed. They're very familiar. Like we've seen all this before. Like Hollywood has no new ideas, right? Okay, so before we get into some papers here, remember that Friday, it's just going to be a bonus session. We'll cover Cialdini's concepts. We'll finish those. I think we'll finish those on Friday. And remember that those are just kind of strictly bonus. You don't have to, there's no attendance taken or anything like that. But I like to do these, and I hope that you enjoy them. But again, Friday is completely optional, so you don't have to worry about that. And then next week, of course, we'll go into the next paper a little bit more. There's another reading assignment, which we'll talk about on Monday. But before I get into some of these papers here, just again, don't feel that you're being picked on or anything if we go through these. I put all the names off, so they're completely anonymous. So I just pulled these at random. But before going on, are there any questions? If not, I mean, just go ahead and type in the chat box or just send me an email later if you have any questions. Let's just kind of go through some papers here. And like this first one here, this is a really good paper, actually. And you can see here that they got the right heading here. They got their name and their page number here. So that's really good. The only thing that I would say though with this paper though, it's a little bit short, first of all. Well, not too short, but a little bit short for the 3 pages. But does anybody notice, just as I scroll through this, anybody notice anything that they would change about this paper? Don't even look at the content, just the formatting here.
Space.
Yeah, spacing. And there's no paragraphs, right? It's just like one long block, right? They need paragraphs here. So you want to make sure to include your spacing and paragraphs. So like for the first one here, the first paragraph here, probably we don't really know what the author's thesis is. Probably right here. So she's going to, or he or she is going to be talking about speech pathology. So you would probably want to have at least a space right here or a paragraph here. And then we can kind of go through this as well. I mean, different points here where there should probably be a new paragraph. You know, like maybe, I don't know, right here perhaps, or I mean, you get the point though. It's just needs to be spacing. You can't just have like one long like block of text. Okay, another example here. Let's take a look at this one. Okay, so right off the bat, what's wrong with this? Again, don't even worry about the content, but what's wrong with this formatting wise that you notice? Exactly, Helena. Yeah, there's no heading. You need the information. So you would need your name and then my name and then the date and the class, etc. up here. And then up here, you would want to have a running head. Now remember that, I'm not gonna do it right now, but remember that from Monday's class, I showed you how that you don't even have to worry about this. You can just go to your Microsoft 365 page and just hit MLA paper and it'll automatically give you the right format. But Helena's right, yeah, there's no heading up here. So you would put my name, your majesty, no, just kidding. And then, you know, class, and then date, etc. But I like the title though. Why am I becoming a nurse? That's a good title. I mean, it's totally fine to have a question in your title and especially in your first sentence here. Now, right here though, me as a young freshman student in the field of nursing, that's a little bit awkward. I would get rid of the me. So right here, I would just start out with this. As a young freshman student in the field of nursing, and I would put a comma right here. And starting what's wrong with this right here? Starting interest. Exactly, Cindy and Hunter. Yeah, it would be and. So remember, if I just right click this here, it'll give you the correction. So it'll just give you the correction like that. You don't have to worry about it. So starting in interesting generation chose nursing throughout my life. And then probably right here, looks like there should probably be another sentence here. I have been inspired and been remembered numerous times why I want. So maybe a little bit awkwardly written here. Remember that it always helps to put your paper aside for a day or two if you can, if you get it done early, and then just go through it and just see how things could be reworded a little bit. And then as the present problem, it sounds a little bit awkward. I would just say something like this: presently, comma, we have been living during a pandemic, makes me want to teleport to my graduation and help society as soon as possible. Okay, so we know the content here. I mean, we know this student, he or she, we know what they're trying to do, and the content is really good, but just little things like this could be reworded as they go through their paper, right? And of course, as Helena said, we would need a running head up here at the top. And once again, just a reminder, if you do want to do a running head, if I'm recommending that you do it through Microsoft 365, so you don't have to worry about this. But hypothetically, and I'm just going to use my cat who I'm looking at here. Let's just say that the student's last name is Hermione. All you need to do here is at the top, you would just go to the home, go to home, and just click on the right hand side here. Like that. And then you can also over here just go to inserts, page number here. And then it'll ask you if you want to do it on the right. And of course at the top right here. And then you would just do that, like that. Okay? And then that'll give you automatic page numbers for each page. You see how it automatically gives you the page number? You don't have to do anything else, like that. Okay? And then if we go down to the bottom, remember that this should be a 3-page paper, so this is a little bit short. So this writer, oh, actually, no, I take that back. Well, no, actually. Either way, okay. The writer could maybe expand a little bit. Here we go to 2 pages, 3 pages. Okay, so she or he did cover the 3-page minimum, so that's fine. And then next week, we'll also go over how to cite sources. Hopefully next week, we can maybe get somebody from the library to come in and show you some of their resources. Of course, I showed you some, and don't worry, I'll show you plenty of information on how you can access the library resources and so forth. Okay, let's take a look here in this case. So they do have their heading up here, right? That's okay. But what are some things that are missing, or just even, again, before we even get to the content, what are some things wrong with the formatting here that you can think of? Yeah, exactly, Helena. It should be indented. And also, as Jillian said, there should be a page number up here in your running head. So let's just say that your name is Smith. You would just do this. You would just highlight it, go back to the home here, go up to the right side here, and then go to insert and page number, like that. So that's how it should look. And then once again, the page number is going to carry through all the pages, like that. And then as Jillian said, yeah, there should be a page number, also should be indented. Also, just like, what do you think is wrong with this title? It's a little bit generic, right? Just zoologist. It should probably have something specific as to what this writer's going to be talking about. So you could say something like, why I want to be a zoologist, something like that. That would be more of a specific title rather than just zoologist. And then as Jillian said, or as Helena said, I think, you would want to have this indented, and then they go through their paper like this. And then also remember that commas are your friend. So I would say that my goal, comma, right here, see where I'm at right here. I would say my goal, comma, once I graduate and get this degree, comma, is to work with wildlife. And then you see here, this is a misspelling. I don't know why Microsoft Word didn't pick that up, but you can see here that either it should be spelled like this, either at a park or aquarium. I will need to learn the necessary skills in order to, or this degree. And then, yeah, so this should be reworded a little bit. I will need to learn the necessary skills to earn this degree and to help me obtain this job after graduating. So once again, little things that you could reword here that can make all the difference in the world in terms of the paper. And also you can see here too that this is a little bit short. Remember, it should be 3 pages. This is a little bit short of 3 pages. So remember that you can always expand on your paper. And just to take this, again, this is just right off the top of my head. I'm just looking at this. I mean, for the, you know, I would just say right off the top of my head, you could have a whole other section here about the counter argument. You could say, and I don't necessarily mean counter argument, but you could have a whole section here where you could say that some people might go into other fields and they might think this about zoology and why it's not a significant field to go into. However, I think that it actually is very significant because of the fact that we learn a lot about humans just by studying animals. And so I'm just making this up off the top of my head here, but you can kind of have a whole counter argument or talk about, well, like what other people think and why zoology is important. Remember, if I go back here to our main page here about the who cares? Why? Why should we care about zoology? Because it's a very important field. In fact, it gives us a lot of information about humans by studying animals. So talk about this right here. Who cares and why should we care? So remember to include that for your next paper as well, is that why is this significant? Why is the topic that you chose important? Why should we care? Who cares and why? Okay, so at this point, we've kind of covered everything. I know we're going to end up a little bit short today, and that's fine. Remember that on Friday, we'll go into Robert Cialdini's concepts a little bit more, and I do want to open it up for any questions that people have. So at this point, we'll wrap up a little bit early today, but does anybody have any questions for the next assignment or anything that we've covered today? Okay, great, great. Well, remember that if you do have any questions about the next assignment, remember there's no assignment for this week, but you can start to maybe think about the next paper. We'll go over the instructions. I think the instructions will be available, I think on Monday of next week. So we'll go over that. There will be another reading assignment for next week, but we'll go over that on Monday. And I just want to thank everybody for attending. Remember that if you, and I've already heard from a couple people that have work issues and so forth that they can't attend these. that's totally fine. This will be on YouTube a little bit later, so you can just attend that way as well. So don't worry about that. Also, for those of you, obviously this is the 9:30 class, but if you ever want to attend the 8 o'clock class, you can do that as well. No problem. So just as long as you attend, that's totally fine. So at this point, I just want to thank everybody for attending for right now. And if not, remember, I'll put this on YouTube and we will see everybody, if you want to, once again, totally optional on Friday. But if not, we'll see everybody on Monday, and just let me know through email if you have any questions about anything, about any of the assignments or anything like that. Okay? So everybody have a great rest of the day. Have a great weekend, and we'll see some of you, if you want to, on Friday.